For centuries, the Catholic Church has been the steward of an extensive collection of documents, relics, and texts that have helped shape the history and culture of the Western world. But what if there was something hidden within its vaults, something so powerful that it could completely rewrite our understanding of the life of Jesus Christ? What if the version of his life we have been taught for centuries is not the full story? These questions lead us to one of the most mysterious and inaccessible places in the world, the Vatican's secret archives. For many, this hidden location holds the key to secrets so profound they could shake the very foundations of Christianity. The Vatican's secret archives are shrouded in mystery, and their contents are largely unknown to the public. But why are these documents kept so far from view? What could be concealed within these ancient walls that is so crucial, so powerful, that it must remain hidden from the world? Some believe that these records contain information that could transform our understanding of Jesus Christ and his teachings, details about his life, his ministry, and even the true nature of his message that have long been suppressed. Throughout history, the life of Jesus Christ has been documented, analyzed, and retold in countless ways. However, there are glaring gaps in the story that we know today. For example, the New Testament, while rich in teachings and events from Jesus' adult life, is virtually silent on his early years. After briefly mentioning his birth, the text jumps directly to his ministry as an adult. What happened during those years of silence? Why were these crucial details omitted? And why have they remained unexplored for centuries? Many researchers and historians have long suspected that the missing years of Jesus' life might be documented in records that have never been made available to the public. Could these records exist within the secret vaults of the Vatican, carefully preserved but kept from the light of day? The Vatican's secret archives are hidden deep within the heart of Vatican City, containing thousands of documents that remain off-limits to the general public. While the Church claims that these records are merely intended to preserve its vast historical heritage, there is evidence to suggest that some of these texts may contain information that the Church would rather keep hidden. Over the centuries, various documents, those that challenge the official narrative about Jesus, have been suppressed, destroyed, or kept under lock and key. The question remains: what could be so threatening in these texts that the Vatican has chosen to keep them from the world? Among the most tantalizing possibilities is the theory that these secret records may contain details about the true origins of Jesus Christ, his teachings that were not included in the Bible, and perhaps even insights into his life before he began his public ministry. Some believe that Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, India, or even Tibet, where he studied various spiritual practices and philosophies before returning to Israel to begin his mission. If this were true, why has this part of the story been kept secret for so long? Could it be that his original teachings were fundamentally different from the version of Christianity we have been taught? Or could it be that his influence was so far-reaching that it would challenge the very power structures that have dominated religious and political life for centuries? One event that profoundly shaped the narrative of Christianity as we know it was the Council of Nicaea, convened in the 4th century by Emperor Constantine. This pivotal council not only determined which Gospels would be considered canon but also actively excluded numerous other texts that presented alternative perspectives on Jesus. These so-called apocryphal Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, offer a radically different interpretation of Jesus and his role in history. These texts provide a more nuanced view of Christ, emphasizing his teachings on spiritual enlightenment, self-knowledge, and the role of women in his ministry. But why were these texts rejected by the Church? Could they have contained knowledge that posed a direct threat to the Church's power and authority? Another intriguing aspect of this mystery involves the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient texts discovered in the 1940s that date back to the time when Jesus was alive. These manuscripts, which shed light on the historical and religious context of the period, were quickly removed from public access and locked away for decades under the control of a select group of scholars with close ties to the Vatican. What exactly did these documents contain that made their studies so restricted? What knowledge was deemed too dangerous to be released to the public? Some researchers even suggest that the Vatican's vaults may contain records written by contemporaries of Jesus that could provide an entirely different perspective on his life and teachings. However, the Church continues to refuse full access to these documents, citing the need for preservation and security. But many question whether the real reason is a fear that certain information might come to light and challenge the very foundation of the Church's authority. After all, history has always been written by the victors, and the Church has had the power to shape the narrative for centuries. What, then, would happen if these hidden texts were to be revealed? What truths about Jesus could they hold? The more we investigate, the clearer it becomes that we are dealing with a complex web of secrets, suppressed knowledge, and historical manipulation. So, what exactly do we know about the life of Jesus Christ? What is fact? What is speculation? And what might still be hidden from us? The version of Jesus' life that we know today is the result of centuries of theological, political, and cultural decisions. But the more we dig, the more it becomes apparent that there are gaps in the story, gaps that have been deliberately created, erased, or ignored. Could there be hidden fragments of history waiting to be revealed? And if so, what would they tell us about the real story of Jesus Christ? The Vatican's mystery continues to fascinate and intrigue generations of scholars, theologians, and curious minds, as new archaeological discoveries are made and previously undisclosed documents are examined. The possibility that something is hidden becomes even more plausible. The question that remains is whether these secrets will ever come to light, and if they do, how will that change the world we know? What impact would the revelation of these lost records have on modern Christianity and our understanding of history? The next chapter in this mystery leads us deeper into the realm of the apocryphal Gospels and the lost manuscripts. What do these texts really say about Jesus? What information has been deliberately silenced, erased, or lost over time? The answer may lie in the ancient manuscripts that were excluded from the official Bible, texts that were considered heretical and banned by the Church. These documents offer alternative versions of the life and teachings of Jesus, and could hold the key to understanding the true nature of his message. One of the most famous of these texts is the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus that emphasize the importance of self-knowledge and spiritual awakening. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene also presents a radically different view, portraying Mary as a key figure in Jesus' ministry who understood his teachings more deeply than his male disciples. And then there is the Gospel of Judas, which tells a completely different story of betrayal, suggesting that Judas was not a traitor but a close follower of Jesus who helped fulfill a divine purpose. These alternative Gospels offer a completely new perspective on Jesus, one that could challenge the established narrative and disrupt centuries of tradition. Why were these texts excluded? What did they contain that made the Church so determined to keep them hidden? And most importantly, what do these texts reveal about Jesus that the Church preferred to suppress? The answer to these questions may be the key to unlocking the hidden truth about the life and teachings of Jesus Christ and the future of Christianity itself. The discovery of the so-called apocryphal Gospels and the ancient manuscripts that have been suppressed over the centuries has the potential to drastically change our understanding of Jesus Christ's life. These texts, which were excluded from the canonical Bible, present an entirely different view of Jesus and his teachings. If accepted, they would force us to reconsider everything we know about sin, redemption, and the very foundation of Christian doctrine. One such apocryphal text, the Gospel of Judas, dramatically alters the traditional view of Judas Iscariot's betrayal. Instead of presenting him as the ultimate traitor, this gospel suggests that Judas's actions were, in fact, part of a divine plan, one that Jesus himself instructed him to fulfill. This interpretation completely redefines the role of Judas and challenges the core ideas of sin and betrayal. If this view were to be accepted, it could significantly alter the doctrine of the Church and challenge its teachings on redemption. But the apocryphal Gospels are far from the only pieces of the puzzle. One of the most important and controversial discoveries of the 20th century occurred between 1946 and 1956, when a collection of ancient documents was discovered in caves near the Dead Sea, known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts, which date back more than 2,000 years, were written by a Jewish sect called the Essenes. Some scholars believe that Jesus might have had contact with this group, whose beliefs were surprisingly similar to his own. The discovery of these scrolls has led to a re-examination of the religious and spiritual context in which Jesus lived, raising new questions about how much of his message was influenced by pre-existing traditions. If Jesus was connected to this group or influenced by their teachings, How much of what we believe about his life has been distorted by later interpretations? In addition to the Dead Sea Scrolls, another significant find was the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of Gnostic texts discovered in Egypt in 1945. These writings reveal an early form of Christianity that was fundamentally different from the doctrine that would later be codified by the Church. Rather than focusing on blind faith and submission to a centralized authority, the Gnostics preached a path of self-knowledge, personal enlightenment, and spiritual freedom. This directly contradicted the Church's view, which relied on control and authority over religious truth. The Gnostic teachings rejected the idea of divine, unquestionable leadership, favoring instead a more individual, mystical approach to spirituality. In a time when the Church was consolidating its power, these ideas were seen as a direct threat to its authority. The question that arises from all of these discoveries is why these texts, many of which were as old as the canonical Gospels, were excluded from the Bible in the first place. The answer, many scholars believe, lies in the intersection of politics and religion. In the early centuries of Christianity, various factions and groups competed to define what the official Christian doctrine would be. The decisions made at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, under Emperor Constantine's leadership, were pivotal in determining which texts would be included in the Bible. The texts that did not align with the views of the Church were declared heretical and suppressed. But was this decision based purely on religious or theological grounds? Or was it also a strategy to consolidate the Church's power and eliminate alternative interpretations of Jesus and his message? Even more recently, many of the texts that were once banned by the Church have been rediscovered. But they still face resistance in being widely accepted. Despite their historical significance, the Vatican has not officially supported the dissemination of these apocryphal Gospels. And most members of the faithful are unaware of their existence. Why does the Church continue to withhold these texts from the public? If these documents contain the truth about Jesus and his teachings, why are they still treated with such secrecy? The Vatican's silence on these matters raises serious questions. Why is the Church so reluctant to embrace these ancient writings? And why is it so difficult for the public to access this potentially transformative knowledge? The more we delve into this mystery, the more it becomes apparent that the version of Jesus we know today may have been shaped to serve the political and religious interests of the Church. The image of Jesus presented in the Bible has been carefully constructed over the centuries to align with the institution's need for a divine, unquestionable, and infallible leader. But what if the real Jesus was different, more like an Eastern sage? A spiritual teacher who focused on inner enlightenment rather than salvation through faith in an institution? If the apocryphal Gospels and ancient texts are to be believed, Jesus may have taught his disciples to seek the divine within themselves, rather than relying on a hierarchical religious institution. If this view of Jesus were to be accepted, it would threaten the Church's monopoly on faith and spiritual authority. Over the centuries, the Church has worked tirelessly to suppress any ideas or teachings that challenge the official narrative, actively promoting a vision of Jesus that fits within its framework of power. But as new discoveries are made and access to previously hidden texts becomes more widespread, more and more people are beginning to question the story they've been told. These new findings raise a critical question. If there are documents that reveal a different version of Jesus' life, why are they still being kept secret? This brings us to another key mystery, the so-called lost years of Jesus. The period of his life that is not accounted for in the Bible. The Gospels mention Jesus' birth, a brief story about his childhood at the age of 12, and then skip directly to his adult life and ministry. What happened during those missing years? How did a simple boy from Nazareth become the revolutionary figure whose teachings would impact millions of lives? And why has the Church avoided answering this question for so long? There have been numerous theories and speculations about what Jesus was doing during these years. Some suggest that he lived an ordinary life, working as a carpenter alongside his father Joseph. But there are other, more intriguing possibilities. Ancient records hint at the idea that Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, India, or even Tibet in search of spiritual knowledge. These theories are based on evidence that has been largely ignored or suppressed by the Church. But they raise questions that demand answers. For instance, in the 19th century, a Russian explorer named Nikolai Notovich claimed to have discovered a Buddhist manuscript in a monastery in Tibet that tells the story of a man named Isa, a wise man from the West who studied with Buddhist and Hindu monks before returning to his homeland. The resemblance between Isa and Jesus is striking, and some scholars have wondered if the two figures are one and the same. Could it be possible that Jesus spent years learning from Eastern spiritual masters? And if so, why has this aspect of his life been left out of Christian tradition? There are even more historical indications that Jesus may have spent time in these regions, learning from spiritual traditions that were radically different from those practiced in Israel at the time. But despite these compelling theories, the Church has largely ignored or rejected this evidence. Why? The more we uncover about the missing years of Jesus' life, the more it becomes clear that there is a much more complex story to tell, one that has been carefully hidden from the public for centuries. If these hidden truths about Jesus are to be believed, it could completely change the way we view his life and his message. The possibility that the Church has rewritten history to suit its own needs is a challenging and provocative idea, one that forces us to question everything we thought we knew about Jesus Christ. Could the true story of Jesus still be hidden, waiting to be revealed to the world? And if so, what would that mean for the future of Christianity and the understanding of spirituality itself? The journey to uncover these hidden truths has only just begun. There are many theories surrounding the formative years of Jesus, especially the time between his childhood and the beginning of his ministry. While the canonical Gospels are almost completely silent about this period, some scholars suggest that Jesus may have spent part of his youth in Egypt, having fled there with his parents to escape King Herod's persecution. During this time, Egypt was a well-established hub of spiritual wisdom, home to numerous mystical traditions and ancient teachings. If Jesus did indeed spend time in Egypt, it's conceivable that he was exposed to these esoteric practices and philosophies. His later teachings on love, compassion, material detachment, and the inner search for truth all resonate strongly with ideas found in Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism. This raises an important question. Could Jesus' message have been influenced by these spiritual traditions? If so, why has the Church, over the centuries, made every effort to conceal this information? If Jesus had indeed embraced these Eastern philosophies, it would have undermined the traditional Christian narrative that he was purely a product of Jewish heritage. The Church, for reasons of preserving its own power, would have much to lose by acknowledging such influences. For this reason, many believe that the Vatican's secret archives contain crucial documents that could prove this theory. These records may include apocryphal manuscripts and other historical accounts that detail the true journey of Jesus during these lost years. If these hidden documents were ever revealed, the entire narrative of Christianity would be forced to shift. The very foundation of the Church's teachings about Jesus, his divinity, his role in human history, and his message, could be challenged. Another vital clue in this story lies in the relationship Jesus may have had with the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in isolation and adhered to strict spiritual practices. Some scholars believe that Jesus could have had direct contact with this group and that their teachings might have influenced his own views. The Essenes valued purity, meditation, and a personal connection to the divine without the need for religious intermediaries, an idea that Jesus appears to have shared with his disciples. The presence of such teachings within the early Christian tradition is often overlooked, but it could explain why Jesus' message was so radical in comparison to the norms of his time. The Church's silence on these matters is deafening. Why has it consistently refused to acknowledge any connection between Jesus and these other spiritual practices? The possibility that Jesus spent years studying with spiritual masters from other traditions raises a fundamental question about the origins of Christianity. Was Jesus simply a Jewish preacher? Or was he a universal spiritual teacher with a message that transcended cultural and religious boundaries? The Church's reluctance to embrace this broader view of Jesus suggests that it would not only shake the very core of Christian doctrine but would also threaten the Church's monopoly over religious truth. This leads to another deeply intriguing question. Why has the Church gone to such great lengths to conceal the truth about Jesus' youth? The canonical Gospels, for all their detail about Jesus' birth and his ministry, leave a large gap in the narrative. The Bible mentions his birth and includes a brief episode when he was 12. But after that, we hear nothing about his life until he begins his ministry as an adult. What happened during those lost years? How did an ordinary boy from Nazareth evolve into a spiritual master whose teachings would impact the entire world? Some scholars propose that Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, India, or even Tibet to study under spiritual masters of other traditions. These theories are intriguing, yet they have been largely ignored by the Church. Why? In the 19th century, a Russian explorer named Nikolai Notovich claimed to have discovered an ancient manuscript in a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. The text, which recounts the story of a man named Isa, describes a wise man from the West who spent several years in India studying with Buddhist and Hindu monks before returning to his homeland. The striking similarities between Isa and Jesus have prompted many to wonder, could the figure of Isa actually be Jesus? Did he spend time studying Eastern spiritual practices? And if so, why has this story been deliberately left out of Christian tradition? The question of Jesus' missing years is not just a theological puzzle, it is a matter of historical and cultural significance. If it can be proven that Jesus was exposed to Eastern spiritual teachings, it would completely alter our understanding of his message. Instead of a purely Jewish worldview, his teachings might be seen as part of a broader spiritual tradition that connected the East and West. This revelation could challenge not only the historical accuracy of the Bible but also the very foundation of Christian belief. The Church's refusal to acknowledge this possibility suggests that it fears the implications of such a discovery, implications that could threaten its authority and influence over billions of followers. But where are the records that could confirm this theory? The Vatican's secret archives are widely believed to hold a treasure trove of documents that have been hidden for centuries. These records may include ancient manuscripts that detail Jesus' travels, his study of other spiritual traditions, and the development of his teachings. If these documents were ever made available to the public, they would undoubtedly cause a seismic shift in how we understand Jesus and his message. But why has the Church kept these documents hidden for so long? Why has the Vatican continued to deny access to these critical pieces of history? The silence surrounding these issues is both telling and troubling. Another key aspect of this story involves the radical transformation of Jesus from a child into a spiritual master. How did a humble boy from Nazareth become the central figure in one of the world's largest religions? The canonical Gospels provide no satisfactory explanation. The missing years remain a profound mystery. Could it be that the Church deliberately chose to omit or alter information about this transformation to present Jesus as a figure whose divinity was unquestionable? If the true story of Jesus' growth and development were told, it might suggest that he was not just a divine figure, but a teacher who evolved and learned, just as anyone would on a spiritual path. If Jesus did indeed spend years studying with masters from other traditions, this would suggest that his message was universal, not confined to Jewish teachings. This would challenge the idea that Christianity is the sole truth and would undermine the Church's claim to religious authority. It is no surprise, then, that the Church has worked tirelessly to suppress any narrative that might cast doubt on its control over religious teachings. As more texts are rediscovered and as access to ancient manuscripts becomes more widespread, it's becoming increasingly clear that the version of Jesus' life that we have been taught for centuries is incomplete and possibly distorted. The Church's efforts to exclude any information about Jesus' youth and his broader spiritual influences have created a narrative that fits the political needs of the institution rather than the true story of Jesus. But the question remains: how much longer can the Church continue to suppress these truths? And when, if ever, will the world be ready to hear the real story of Jesus Christ? If the truth does eventually come to light, it will undoubtedly change the way we view not only Jesus but also the entire history of Christianity. The secrets of Jesus' life may be hidden, but the truth is gradually coming to the surface, and it may be more complex, more profound, and more transformative than we ever imagined. At the heart of all of this is the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. A pivotal moment in the history of Christianity. Emperor Constantine convened this council to consolidate the Church's power and to create a single, unified doctrine. The decisions made at Nicaea were not just theological, they were political, designed to control and manipulate the message of Christianity to serve the needs of the empire. The creation of the doctrine of the Trinity, which established Jesus as not only a human being but also as God, was a central point of the council. But what else happened behind closed doors? What texts were excluded, and what details were erased to create the version of Christianity we know today? For centuries, the story of Jesus Christ has been told and retold through a single, unified narrative, carefully crafted by those in power. But what if the story we've been taught about Jesus is far from the whole truth? What if hidden within the vaults of the Vatican lies a different version of his life, one that has been deliberately concealed from the public eye? The more we explore this mystery, the more it becomes apparent that there are significant gaps in the story of Jesus. Gaps that the Vatican, with its immense power and influence, has worked tirelessly to maintain. But why? What is so dangerous about the real story of Jesus that it must be kept hidden? This question leads us straight to the heart of one of the world's most inaccessible places, the Vatican Secret Archives. Tucked away beneath Vatican City, this labyrinthine vault holds thousands of documents, many of which have been sealed off from the public for centuries. For the most part, only a select group of scholars, after undergoing a rigorous approval process, are allowed access to these mysterious records, but even they face severe restrictions, unable to freely browse through the vast collection. Officially, the Vatican justifies this secrecy as a matter of preservation, protecting these ancient manuscripts from the ravages of time. But could there be another, more sinister reason for the Church's tight control over this information? Over the years, the Vatican Secret Library has become synonymous with hidden knowledge, holding documents that could rewrite the history of Christianity. Among these texts, some theorists and historians believe that there are forbidden records detailing the true life of Jesus Christ. Could the Church be sitting on documents that reveal a different version of the story of Jesus, one that contradicts everything we have been taught? The very idea of this challenges the notion of truth as we know it. If these texts exist, what secrets do they contain that are so dangerous? Could they be the missing pieces of a puzzle that have the power to reshape the foundation of Christian faith? The most intriguing of these texts could be the lost manuscripts from the apocryphal Gospels, books that were deliberately excluded from the Bible during the early formation of Christian doctrine. These Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and even the Gospel of Judas, offer a radically different interpretation of Jesus and his teachings. Rather than seeing him solely as a divine being, these texts portray him as a master of spiritual wisdom, a teacher who emphasized the pursuit of self-knowledge and enlightenment over blind obedience to religious institutions. The Church, during its rise to power, saw these texts as a threat, one that could dismantle the hierarchical structure they had worked so hard to establish. At the heart of this suppression lies the Council of Nicaea, convened by Emperor Constantine in 325 AD. Constantine, eager to consolidate his power over the Roman Empire, recognized the disunity that existed among the various Christian factions. Different groups had vastly different interpretations of who Jesus was, and how he should be understood. Some believed Jesus was simply a great spiritual teacher, while others saw him as a divine figure. There were even groups that believed his teachings were not meant to be followed blindly, but were intended to help individuals reach spiritual enlightenment. For Constantine, this lack of a singular, unified Christian doctrine posed a problem. To ensure that Christianity could be used as a tool to control his empire, he needed to eliminate any dissenting views. And so, he summoned the bishops to the Council of Nicaea to decide once and for all what would become the official Christian doctrine. It was at Nicaea that the church leaders decided to solidify Jesus' divinity, making it official that he was of the same substance as God the Father. This decision wasn't based purely on theological reasoning, it was a strategic political move, designed to consolidate the Church's authority and power over the faithful. But this wasn't the only significant change that took place at the council. In addition to declaring Jesus divine, the bishops at Nicaea also decided to exclude several key texts that offered alternative views of Christ. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and even the Gospel of Judas, texts that painted a picture of Jesus as a spiritual guide rather than a divine ruler, were labeled as heretical and banned from the Christian canon. But why? Why would the Church go to such lengths to suppress these writings? Why would they go so far as to exclude the possibility of a Jesus who was more human than divine? The answer lies in the power dynamics at play. The Church, which had already begun to establish its dominance in the religious and political landscape, needed to maintain control over the spiritual lives of the people. By presenting Jesus as a divine figure, one who could not be questioned, the Church ensured its authority over the faithful. If these alternative Gospels had been kept, It would have meant that the Church was no longer the sole authority on spiritual matters. People could have turned to these texts for guidance, rather than relying solely on the clergy. The hierarchical structure of the Church, which depended on intermediaries between man and God, would have been threatened, and so, these texts were destroyed, their message silenced. The consequences of this manipulation extend far beyond the exclusion of certain texts. It raises the question: to what extent has Christianity been shaped to serve the political and religious needs of those in power? The version of Jesus that has been passed down to us over the centuries, the one we know today, may not be the true Jesus at all. Instead, it may be a carefully constructed image designed to maintain control over the masses. If this is true, then the story of Jesus, as we know it, is not the complete picture. Could it be that the truth has been hidden from us for centuries? But the mystery doesn't end there. The Vatican's secret archives hold more than just suppressed Gospels. They are rumored to contain letters from Romans who witnessed Jesus' crucifixion, as well as records of secret meetings between early Christian leaders who debated the true nature of Christ and how to shape the doctrine. Some even believe that the archives hold original texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, ancient documents that reveal a far more complex picture of early Christianity. These texts show that there were multiple versions of Jesus' teachings before the Church decided on an official narrative. Why are these texts kept hidden? Why does the Vatican continue to control access to this information? The answer may lie in the fear that revealing the truth would challenge the Church's authority, shaking the very foundation of Christianity itself. What would happen if all of the Vatican's secret documents were made public? Would the Church lose its credibility? Would people's faith be shaken? Or would the story of Jesus become even richer and more complex than we ever imagined? The silence surrounding these documents only deepens the mystery. If the Church has nothing to hide, why does it continue to keep these records sealed away? If these texts contain the truth about Jesus, why not share them with the world? Perhaps the Church fears that exposing these truths would lead to a complete reevaluation of Jesus' life and teachings. After all, if the message of Jesus was influenced by other spiritual traditions, such as Eastern philosophies, it would mean that the Church has been misrepresenting the true nature of his teachings for centuries. This question brings us to the next great mystery: the true origins of Christianity. How much of what we know today is actually rooted in the teachings of Jesus? And how much has been shaped by the political and theological needs of the Church? Christianity, as we know it, is the result of centuries of transformation, manipulation, and theological disputes. But what if the true message of Jesus was lost along the way, buried beneath layers of political control and religious doctrine? What if the version of Jesus we know today is not the real Jesus at all? The truth about Jesus' life and teachings may be hidden in the Vatican's secret archives, waiting to be uncovered. The question is, when will the truth come to light? And how will it change the world? The story of Jesus, and the history of Christianity, is far from over. The secrets that lie within the Vatican's vaults could finally reveal a version of Jesus that is far more complex, and far more profound, than we have ever imagined. Imagine, for a moment, that the version of Jesus Christ's life we have been taught is not the full story. What if there are hidden truths, buried deep within the vaults of the Vatican, that have been carefully concealed to protect a narrative that suits those in power? The history we know about Jesus has been carefully curated over centuries. But what if there are crucial pieces of this puzzle that have been erased or manipulated? Could the real teachings of Jesus, as conveyed in ancient texts, be so different from the Church's version that it could transform the very foundation of Christianity? To truly understand what's at stake, we must look back to the origins of Christianity, a time when the faith was a collection of diverse beliefs and interpretations about Jesus. In the early centuries following Jesus' death, there was no single, unified Christian doctrine. There were many branches of Christianity, each with its own perspective on who Jesus was and what his mission truly entailed. Some saw him as an enlightened prophet, others as a spiritual master whose teachings revolved around self-knowledge, while a third group believed he was a divine being, part of a sacred and powerful trinity. This multiplicity of beliefs created a fragmented, diverse understanding of Jesus and his teachings. However, this diversity didn't last long. Over time, the early Christian movement was forced to unite under a single narrative. one dictated by the Church. The Gnostic movement, which flourished in the early centuries of Christianity, is perhaps the best example of this rich diversity of thought. The Gnostics believed that Jesus came to teach a way of inner knowledge, where salvation was not dependent on religious rituals or mediators, but on discovering the divine within oneself. For the Gnostics, the Church was unnecessary, as each person could connect directly with the divine without the need for priests or intermediaries. This was a radical idea that threatened the emerging power of the Church. The Church, in its infancy, saw the Gnostic movement as a direct challenge to its authority and quickly branded the Gnostics as heretics. Their texts were destroyed, their teachings silenced, but in 1945, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt revealed many of these suppressed Gnostic texts. Among them was the Gospel of Thomas, one of the most controversial manuscripts ever found. Unlike the canonical Gospels, which focus heavily on the death and resurrection of Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas delves into his spiritual teachings. One of the most impactful passages in this Gospel reads, "If we know ourselves, then we will be known and we will understand that we are children of the living Father." This statement hints at a radically different approach to spirituality, one based on self-awareness and the recognition of divinity within, as opposed to the Church's emphasis on salvation through its institutions. Further complicating this mystery is the possibility that Jesus may have traveled to the East, where he could have encountered Buddhist or Hindu teachings. Some scholars suggest that elements of Eastern philosophy may have influenced his message, explaining the striking similarities between his teachings and those found in these ancient traditions. Yet, the Church has worked tirelessly to erase these connections, believing that to acknowledge such influences would undermine Christianity's claim to be an independent, unique religion. But the suppression of spiritual knowledge wasn't limited to Eastern teachings. The Church also took steps to alter the perception of key figures in the story of Jesus, one of the most significant being Mary Magdalene. Instead of recognizing Mary Magdalene as a close disciple who played an essential role in Jesus' ministry, the Church transformed her into a figure of repentance, a sinner, a distortion that has no basis in the original texts. This narrative manipulation served the Church's interests by diminishing the importance of women in early Christianity, reinforcing the male-dominated structure that the Church sought to preserve. This distortion of Mary Magdalene's role was not the only manipulation. However, there are theories suggesting that Jesus himself may have had a family, a notion that would directly challenge the Church's teaching on his celibacy and his role as the exclusive divine teacher. The Gospel of Philip, another Gnostic text, even hints at a close relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, mentioning that he often kissed her and considered her a companion in his work. If this were true, it would mean that the image of a celibate Christ, a figure divorced from human connection, was a later invention designed to align Jesus with the Church's ideals. The relationship between early Christianity and paganism is yet another overlooked area in Church history. In the early centuries, as Christianity began to spread, the Church found it necessary to incorporate elements from various pagan traditions in order to facilitate conversions. One prime example of this is the establishment of Christmas on December 25th, an important date that coincided with the Roman festival celebrating the birth of the sun god Mithras. The concept of a virgin birth, central to the Nativity story, was also not unique to Christianity, as this myth existed in several pagan religions before the rise of Christianity. These adaptations reveal that Christianity, as it is known today, was shaped by older traditions that were absorbed into the Church's teachings in order to make the religion more appealing to a broader audience. The manipulation of Christianity's history became even more evident during the Middle Ages, when the Church consolidated its power over Europe. The Inquisition, for instance, sought to purge any opposing ideas by hunting down heretics and suppressing any materials that could challenge the established doctrine. Books were burned, and documents were destroyed, ensuring that any information that could shed light on the true origins of Christianity remained hidden. If there are so many changes and adaptations throughout the centuries, it raises the inevitable question: why did the Church need to hide these truths? Why was it so crucial to prevent certain documents and ideas from being made accessible to the public? The answer, it seems, lies in the need for the Church to maintain control over the faithful. A Christianity based on personal knowledge and inner discovery would undermine the Church's hierarchical structure. where priests and religious leaders act as intermediaries between God and man. If individuals could connect directly with the divine, without the need for a church, the institution's grip on power would weaken. And so, the church set about censoring knowledge, erasing history, and shaping Christianity into a tool of control. The reality is that if we knew the full truth about the origins of Christianity, it would drastically alter our understanding of faith. This brings us to the Church's long-standing history of censorship. The Catholic Church has always held a monopoly on knowledge, controlling what the faithful were allowed to read, learn, and believe. Any text that challenged the Church's authority was either banned, censored, or destroyed. The practice of censoring inconvenient knowledge began in the early centuries of Christianity, when Gospels and texts were banned for not aligning with the official doctrine. This practice became even more entrenched during the Middle Ages, when the Vatican imposed its complete control over information. One of the most famous examples of this control was the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the list of prohibited books, established by the Vatican. This list included not only religious texts but also works of science and philosophy that contradicted the Church's worldview. Thinkers such as Galileo Galilei, who dared to challenge the Church's geocentric model of the universe, were condemned and silenced. Others, like Giordano Bruno, who speculated about the possibility of an infinite universe, were punished in the most brutal way, burned alive at the stake. This history of censorship raises a powerful question. What other truths about the life of Jesus and the origins of Christianity have been erased over time? What else has the Church hidden in its vaults? And why? The story of Jesus is far more complex and far-reaching than we have been led to believe. The Vatican's secrecy only heightens the mystery, leaving us to wonder if the real story of Jesus is still locked away, waiting to be revealed. What would happen if all of this hidden knowledge were to come to light? Would the Church lose its credibility? Would people's faith be shaken to its core? Or would we finally see the full, unaltered story of Jesus, one that is more powerful, more human, and more universal than we ever imagined? The mystery is still unfolding, and the search for the truth is far from over. What if everything we've been told about the origins of Christianity, and about the life of Jesus Christ, was a carefully constructed story designed to control and manipulate? What if the truth, hidden deep within the vaults of the Vatican, could completely alter the foundation of our faith? What if the real story of Jesus Christ, as told in forbidden Gospels and lost manuscripts, challenges everything we've been taught? For centuries, the Church has suppressed knowledge, eliminated dissenting voices, and destroyed documents that threaten its power. But what if these long-hidden truths were to come to light? How would the world react? For over 1,000 years, the Church wielded its immense power not only to guide the faithful but to control the narrative of history itself. The earliest days of Christianity were filled with diverse beliefs, many of which diverged greatly from the single narrative we know today. Christianity was not a unified religion at first, rather, it was a tapestry of different ideas, each interpreting Jesus in their own way. Some saw him as a great prophet, a man who brought wisdom and enlightenment. Others viewed him as a spiritual master who came to teach the path of self-knowledge, while another group argued that Jesus was a divine figure, part of the sacred Trinity. The message was fluid, and its interpretation varied widely across the early Christian communities. But as Christianity began to grow, it wasn't long before this diversity of thought was seen as a threat. The Church, eager to consolidate its power, began to stamp out these alternative views. The Gnostic movement, which emerged in the early centuries of Christianity, posed one of the greatest challenges. The Gnostics believed that salvation came not from rituals or clergy, but from discovering divinity within oneself. For them, the Church, with its hierarchical structure and dependence on religious intermediaries, was unnecessary. This message was dangerous for the Church, which thrived on the submission of the masses to its control. In an effort to maintain its authority, the Church began a systematic campaign to suppress the Gnostic texts and teachings. Many of their writings were destroyed, and their followers were persecuted. But in 1945, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt gave us a glimpse into the lost world of Gnostic Christianity. Among the texts found was the Gospel of Thomas, a document that radically differs from the canonical Gospels. Rather than focusing on the death and resurrection of Jesus, This gospel focuses on his teachings of spiritual wisdom. One of the most striking lines from this gospel states, "If we know ourselves, then we will be known and we will understand that we are children of the living Father." This statement suggests that Jesus' message was about inner enlightenment, a journey of self-realization and self-discovery, not just faith in an external savior. It is a vision of Christianity that challenges the very foundation of the Church's teachings. The suppression of these texts wasn't just limited to the Gnostics. There are also strong indications that Jesus may have been influenced by other religious traditions, particularly those of the East. Could it be that Jesus traveled to India or Tibet, where he encountered the teachings of Buddhism or Hinduism? Some scholars have pointed to the striking similarities between Jesus' teachings and Eastern philosophies. His emphasis on love, compassion, and inner peace mirrors concepts found in Eastern spirituality. Yet, the Church has systematically erased any evidence of these influences. Why? The answer lies in the Church's desire to keep Christianity separate and independent from other religions. If Jesus' teachings were influenced by Eastern philosophies, it would mean that Christianity was not unique but was part of a broader, interconnected spiritual tradition. But there's more to this story, something that shakes the very core of Christian tradition: the question of Jesus' family and lineage. For centuries, the Church has insisted that Jesus was celibate, with no romantic involvement or children. This idea of a pure and divine Christ has been central to the Church's doctrine. But what if this narrative was carefully crafted to hide the truth? What if Jesus had a wife and children, and his descendants still exist today? This theory is not as far-fetched as it may seem. Historical documents, apocryphal texts, and even clues in Renaissance art suggest that Jesus may have had a close relationship with Mary Magdalene, possibly even a romantic one. The Gospel of Philip, one of the Gnostic texts, explicitly refers to Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion and mentions that Jesus often kissed her. This raises the controversial possibility that Mary Magdalene wasn't just a follower of Jesus, but his partner in both life and ministry. If this theory is true, it would mean that the Church has suppressed the idea of Jesus' family for centuries. Why would the Church go to such lengths to hide this information? The answer lies in power. If Jesus had descendants, they would have a legitimate claim to spiritual leadership, one that could directly challenge the authority of the papacy and the entire ecclesiastical hierarchy. For the Church, the existence of Jesus' bloodline represents a threat to its centuries-old monopoly on religious authority. This theory gained even more traction with the discovery of local legends in southern France, where some claim that Mary Magdalene fled after Jesus' crucifixion. According to these legends, she lived in the Provence region until her death, and her descendants were believed to have preserved a sacred secret, one that traces back to the bloodline of Jesus. These stories have inspired numerous books and theories, including The Holy Grail and the Sacred Lineage by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. According to their interpretation, the Holy Grail isn't a physical chalice, but rather the royal bloodline of Jesus Christ, kept hidden for centuries to protect it from the Church's wrath. Could these descendants still be alive today? Some believe that certain European aristocratic families, particularly the Merovingians, may be connected to this secret lineage. These families, they argue, were closely associated with the Cathars and the Knights Templar, two groups that have long been linked to the preservation of secret knowledge about Jesus' bloodline. The theory goes that over the centuries, this knowledge was carefully protected and concealed to avoid any direct conflict with the Church. However, much of the evidence that could prove this theory has either been destroyed or remains under the control of the Vatican. The Templars, for example, were persecuted and wiped out in the 14th century, largely because they were believed to possess forbidden knowledge about Christ's lineage. When King Philip IV of France ordered their destruction, many of the Templars' most valuable documents disappeared without a trace. Was this information deliberately hidden by the Church? And why has it been kept under wraps for so long? Even Renaissance art may hold hidden clues. Many believe that Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most brilliant minds of his time, knew about this secret and subtly incorporated it into his art. In The Last Supper, some theorists argue that the figure sitting next to Jesus is not the Apostle John, as traditionally believed, but Mary Magdalene. The positioning of the figures, the absence of a chalice on the table, and the way Jesus and Mary Magdalene's hands seem to form the letter M, have all been interpreted as a coded message from Da Vinci, suggesting that the secret of Jesus' lineage was being revealed to the initiated few. But why has this lineage never been officially acknowledged? The answer lies in the potential collapse of the traditional Christian structure. If it were proven that Jesus had a family, it would challenge the very core of Christian theology and threaten the power and authority of the Church. For centuries, the Church has worked to keep this truth hidden, to maintain its control over the story of Jesus and the interpretation of his message. This mystery raises profound questions. What if the story we've been told about Jesus is only part of the truth? What if there's more to the story? Something deeper, more complex, and more transformative than we ever imagined? And if the truth were to come to light, would we be ready to accept it? Would it change the way we view Jesus, the Church, and the very foundation of our faith? The secrets of Jesus' lineage may still be hidden, but they are slowly coming to the surface. The question is, will the world be ready when they are finally revealed?